Hello, and welcome to Collie Conversations, the podcast that's all about transforming your life with your Border Collie. I'm Gemma Fisher, your expert in all things collie. Whether you're dealing with reactivity, recall struggles, or just looking to understand your collie better, you've come to the right place. I'm here to help you turn those frustrating behaviours into wins with practical advice and real life solutions. If you haven't already, head over to our Facebook group to get your collie questions answered in my weekly live Q&A session. Plus, the group also has training guides, my recommended resources from the podcast, and lots of other extra support and tips for collie owners just like you. Today, we'll be discussing how to keep a Border Collie occupied to help them be their best selves. So grab a cup of tea and get ready to take some notes. Let's get started. So when it comes to something as complex as feeding options, we have quite a wide variety of options available to us. So I'm just going to go through the sort of broad list of what that looks like. So dry food or kibble, you might have heard it described as kibble. And this is created either by a process called extrusion, which is the most common way of creating dry food, baking, cold pressed, air drying, or freeze dried. Those are the different ways that we can come up with dried food. And roughly speaking, in terms of that list, the extrusion process would be the one that gets rid of the most vitamins and nutrients out of the food because of the way that it's produced, versus free-dried or air drying or freeze-dried at the other end of the spectrum. The difference in cost is quite significant in terms of how much it costs to do freeze-dried food versus extrusion. So you will notice that when it comes to how much a dog food costs on the shelf. We also then can look at things like semi-moist kibble. And one of the things about semi-moist kibble, which is interesting, in recent conversations with Holly Barker, the canine nutritionist that I work with quite closely through Collie Culture Club, she explained that some of the ingredients that they use to make semi-moist kibble, whilst it makes really good training treats, and it's very good for sort of breaking them up and using them as training treats, it can actually, one of the ingredients in there can actually cause our dogs to go a little bit wild, go a bit crazy. So if you've got a Border Collie who is already on that end of the spectrum, you might want to avoid that because that might increase their likelihood of being a bit over the top. There are also obviously things like tinned or pouches of food, or those chub rolls that you can get. You tend to need to feed a bit more of those because of the high water content. That's obviously different to dry food, which you can feed smaller quantities of. But those can be useful for particular issues that you might have with your dog, urinary issues, for example, where you might want to feed a higher water content. And of course, home cooked foods is an option. Now, very helpfully, there are dog food manufacturers that have started to give us sort of a convenient version of that. So they do the home cooking, if you like, for us, and then they package it up. Normally, the ones I can most spring to mind are things where they cook the food for us and then they freeze them. So they come to us in the frozen versions for us to defrost, and then we can feed them that way. And then the other option is raw dog food, which isn't everybody's cup of tea for a similar reason, actually, to the home cooked food, actually, because it requires space in your freezer. It requires a little bit more work in terms of defrosting the food each day. Not so easy to travel with. One of my dogs is raw fed, and traveling with him is just a little bit more, takes a little bit more thinking about. And I have fed raw food to a group of sort of 6 to 7 dogs in the past. And that is really a challenge if you're going away for any length of time. But certainly one of the options where I've seen that my dogs do really well on raw dog food, and certainly some of my students' dogs do well on raw dog food as well. But the truth of it is that when it comes to any of these foods, the most important piece of the puzzle is the fact that it is a complete dog food versus it being a complementary food. And what I mean by a complete food is that that it has all of the vitamins and nutrients that is needed for that dog on a day-to-day basis. So for example, you'll maybe have had this advice from your vet that if your dog is poorly, to feed them chicken and rice to help them get over whatever some stomach upset that they've had. Now, personally speaking, I now know that there are better ingredients than chicken and rice to use, but let's just use the chicken and rice as for example. If you were only to feed chicken and rice to your dog for any length of time, it just wouldn't have the full gamut of nutrients that your dog needed to be healthy. So that would be, something where you would need to supplement it with other bits and pieces. Now, this is, for me personally, this is why I buy dog food in as opposed to coming up with my own recipes. Because one of the things that I'm most concerned with is that my dog is getting everything that they need in order to be happy and healthy. So, one thing just to watch out for when you are looking at different dog foods is whether or not they are a complete food or whether or not they are complementary. And raw feeding sometimes gets a bit of a bum deal in this, in so much as some raw feeding is complete in so much as it has vegetables and other bits and pieces added into it. But if it doesn't, you might need to add a topper, or you might need to add some sort of supplement to make sure that you are covering all of those vitamin and nutrient needs. So just something to really think about, because that, more than anything from my perspective, is what's important, is making sure that it is a complete food and the dog has everything it needs to be able to be healthy. Now, another thing that often comes up when we're talking about dog food is the difference between whether or not we should be feeding a high protein food versus the quality of protein that is in that food. So I remember going to a Barbara Sykes collie training workshop a long time ago when I think I must have gone with Kyle, with Ella, and I was told to feed a low protein food, that Border Collies that were working on farms were being fed something like Skinner's Field and Trial, which is very low protein, very working dog price, food, and when you look at a bag of that, it certainly does not have a particularly good quality protein in it. It doesn't score very highly in the All About Dog Food website. But as she pointed out, and certainly there are many people that will testify to this, lots of dogs do really, really well on it. Dogs that are going out and working on farms, so are doing a job of work, if you like, every day. So protein levels do have something to do with behavior output, but quality of protein is definitely a piece of the puzzle as well. So if we only look at the side of the packet of our dog food, and incidentally, the way that we know whether or not it's a good quality food or not is normally determined by what the first ingredient on the packet of our dog's food is. So if, for example, you are feeding something like salmon and rice, but the first ingredient is something like wheat or some other filler, then that would tell us that that's going to be sort of the main thing that your dog is eating every day, which isn't necessarily ideal. And it's certainly not if you're looking to feed salmon and salmon and potato, whatever it might be, feeding that's what you're trying to feed, but actually that might not be what you are feeding based on the way that it's made up. So that's something to think about. So high protein levels, do they translate into dogs that are very wild and a bit over the top? Yes and no. They can, definitely. And certainly when I am working with students, one of the things that Holly Barker, when she comes in and she does her monthly check-in with us, her nutrition clinic with us, she does kind of ask about, is the food relative to why that dog is a bit over the top? But sometimes it can be other things that cause the dog to be over the top as well. So it's not necessarily, nothing that we look at when we're working on a training plan is done in isolation. We're looking at the whole dog. So we're looking at it from a holistic perspective, as opposed to that's the one thing that if we change that, then everything will be better. It doesn't work like that. So high protein levels can cause hyperactivity in dogs. Absolutely, they can. But quality of protein is very important. And as I say, knowing what quality of protein, you can normally tell by how expensive the dog food is, truthfully, because obviously the better quality the protein, the more expensive it will have been to produce that food. So that's certainly something to look out for. Now, in terms of how you work all of that out, I wouldn't dream of saying that I am the expert on this at all, but a port of call that I always send people to get started is a website called allaboutdogfood.com. And it's literally just that, allaboutdogfood.com. If you type that into Google, it will bring you up that website. And this rates food based on the ingredients in that food. And what's really helpful about this is I don't even know I would be able to put a number on how many dog foods there are out there. And, also, again, they're over the difference between dry food, the semi-moist kibble, tin, pouch, home cooked, raw. There's just an absolute array of different dog foods available. So if you are wanting to try and work out, is the food that you're feeding a good one for your Border Collie? Because maybe you are starting to question whether or not the behaviour output that you're getting isn't ideal. I would suggest going to that website in the first instance. And my general rule of thumb is, for myself and for the students I teach, is whatever is the the money that you spend on your food, doesn't have to be the most expensive dog food. Absolutely it doesn't. But let's go for the best quality we can get for the money that we're looking to spend on our food. I think that's really important. Now, if you go to this allaboutdogfood.com website, you can use the filters to select whether or not you are looking for a raw, dry, or wet dog food. Okay, so if you're looking to change foods, or maybe you haven't got your Border Collie yet and you're thinking ahead, you can start thinking about what type of food that you want to feed, and you can get a list based on your preference. And then you can sort it by rating. So you can look at what is the sort of the highest rating versus the lowest. But to give you an idea, anything rated 4 to 5 is usually going to be pretty good. All right. So you can also, this is another thing that we've started to understand a little bit more about, and that is what specific proteins or ingredients are going into that food. So we know, don't we, ourselves, that we can get conditions like IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, and often it can be helpful to treat those by avoiding certain proteins or certain ingredients. And the same is true for our dogs. So if you are looking to avoid particular things, this can be really helpful using this website, because you can help kicking off allergies or things like that. But always make sure that you're going to read the ingredients list as well, just in case. So I wouldn't necessarily just go by that website and go, oh, well, it came back and it wasn't quite right. Always, before you order, just especially if you are trying to avoid an allergy, which is going to cause a major problem for your dog, always read the ingredients list just as well, in case. So overall, what is the best food for a Border Collie? As so often I answer, and I know it's infuriating, but it depends. It depends, because each Border Collie is an individual, and your lifestyle with your Border Collie is unique. All right. So it depends on sort of many factors. And here's a few things that I always look to consider when I'm talking to students. First off, the dog's physical well-being, that has to be a primary consideration, doesn't it? So not being too thin and not being too fat. Often after spaying or neutering, what we can start to see is dogs can put on too much weight. So sometimes the food that they were on prior to that operation, we need to have a rethink, because a dog that is too fat, obviously there can be issues with other things like joints and that kind of thing. But equally, there are a lot of Border Collies that can be a little bit thin, because they run a little bit on their nerves, and so keeping weight on them can be quite difficult. So as I say, that physical well-being is going to be an important piece of the puzzle. Digestive issues. All right. So I think too often people live with digestive issues without really thinking of them as issues. So as a rule of thumb, poo should be firm. All right. It should not be sloppy. It should not be a funny color. For the most part, it should be firm, and you shouldn't be getting regular flatulence from your dog that is clearing the room, in the evening when you're trying to watch some TV. And for example, one of the dogs in my student group, she had sent me an email shortly before the podcast was due to air, and I just thought I'd share this information that she has sent to me. She said Max's gut health is really improving. We've swapped him to Millie's lamb and veg kibble with a bit of butcher's wet food. We add Maxi Digest. His poo is so much firmer and a better colour, with no evening gas. We've removed salmon and rice kibble from his diet, so that seemed to be something that might be setting up. If he only has 2 walks a day, morning and evening, he goes about 3 times. If we go for a long afternoon, he poos more, and it gets sloppier as we go along, but it's not yellow anymore. So, that's a lot of information, isn't it, about food and supplements and other bits and pieces. But the really key thing about the information that she sent to me that I thought was important, and I wanted to share with you guys in the podcast, was some of the success she's also had in training as well. All right. And I definitely think, as well as the training work that she's been doing, and she has been working hard, there's a definite link between him feeling better in himself and then this success and this win that she's shared with me. So she says Max has continued to be more chilled with visitors, he knows, to the point I want more people to call so we can practice more. A couple of years ago I dreaded visitors calling, still overexcitable but calms down sooner. Just fabulous, really, really good. But as I say, those two things are linked. It isn't as simple as she's just been working on training with visitors. She's been looking at the overall needs of Max, and this is what has come up for him, that actually digestive wise, he needs a little bit of support. And as I say, in the nutrition clinic that Holly offers my club students on a monthly basis, that has really, really helped, with that win. So I'm really pleased with that. It's brilliant. Now, the other thing to be thinking about in addition to, the digestive system is the quality of the coat. And we'll sometimes see the quality of the coat ahead of things like digestive issues. And the thing that we're looking for is it shiny? Is it nice and glossy? Is it soft to touch? Or is it a bit flaky? Is it a bit dry? That kind of a thing. Quality of the coat will tell us a lot of information about how well the dog is processing whatever food we're feeding them. Behavior wise, and this is where I get particularly interested, obviously, as a trainer, is what energy are we getting out of the dog? So do we have a dog that is just, completely wild and jumping off the furniture and is just generally a bit over the top, almost like a child with ADHD? They just cannot settle down. Or are they quite calm and content? And, they might have specific things that they get upset about. So they may have triggers that upset them. But on a day-to-day basis, they're generally, quite content. So food, as I say, will have a massive inroads into the dog's behavior. So we need to take that into account when we're working on training behavior issues. The example I often use, in case people are struggling, is you think if your child has gone to a children's party and they've had a lot of sugar, if you think about what children are like after they've had a lot of sugar, and sometimes some adults, that can be like for dogs. If we are giving them a food which is just too much for their systems, maybe it's got too much protein, maybe it's got too many additives and preservatives, that kind of a thing, then that might be the output that we get from them. And just like you wouldn't sit down with a child to start teaching them, spelling or maths or something else, straight after they'd come back from a children's party, that's not going to be ideal for training our dogs to behave better in certain situations if as I say, their system is just running a little bit hot. Now, the other thing to think about, and if you're dealing with these things, you probably are across these anyway, but you might have more complex issues that you need to be taking into account. So maybe allergies, which are causing itching or other issues in terms of, digestive upsets, urinary problems. We touched on those earlier with talking about wet food, or heart problems, and could be any number of other things as well. These need specialist help. Absolutely, they need specialist help. And personally, I would recommend working closely with your veterinary surgeon, but also bringing in a canine nutritionist. Unless the vet specializes in nutrition, such as somebody like Dr. Amber Batson, who is a brilliant resource, and I'll share her details in the Facebook group. It can be hard for them to keep up to date, just in the same way that with any vet, if they are doing like day-to-day stuff, think of them as GPs, but if they're not specializing in something, it is going to be harder for them to keep up to date. So having a detailed consultation with a canine nutritionist is an absolute must from my perspective. As I say, if you're dealing with particular problems, and indeed, if you're struggling with the wide range of options that are available, I think that having a consultation is a good idea, because it can be overwhelming. The other thing, of course, is a nutritionist will be able to help guide you to the most helpful supplements for your dog's problems as well. So I know that in the information that came from my student earlier, we talked about Maxi Digest was one of the supplements that had been recommended. These are not necessarily things that, you can just try them out, obviously, but having somebody to be able to point you in the direction is going to avoid you, it's going to save you money apart from anything, instead of buying different supplements that you don't need, but also it's going to be able to help your dog that much quicker get to feeling in a good place, which is going to help and support your training behavior plans as well. My online students, like I've mentioned already with Max, have had enormous success with supplements helping their dogs, both from a digestive and a behaviour issue perspective as well, through the monthly support of Holly Barker's nutrition clinic with us. So I highly recommend, if you're struggling at all, she has a free Facebook group that you can go and get more advice and help from her, but she also does consultations as well. So definitely check her information out in the Facebook group where I've shared the links. Now, fussy eaters. I think Border Collies often get labelled as fussy eaters, and I think it's always worth investigating that statement a little bit more. All right. So the sort of questions that I will ask if somebody comes to me and says, oh, yeah, my Border Collie's fussy, I have to keep changing things or whatever. What I'm interested in is this their everyday meals that they're fussy with? So is it, that they don't like the same thing every single day? Is it to do with how many meals they have? So lots of Border Collie owners report that their dog is not that interested in their morning meal, but really, enjoys their evening meal. So is there, one solution is, do we go to one meal and then do we have a dog that eats better? Is a possibility. Is it something to do with what they're being fed on? Is it not suitable in one way, shape, or form? Is it that potentially the dog has allergies that they can't communicate to us about? So if we look to try different ingredients, does that potentially help get them eating a little bit better? Again, this is where consultations can be so useful, because you can dive into the minutiae of what's going on. And sometimes, as I say, simple changes help. Like I said, the number of meals that they're being offered can be one thing. But if not, then I'd be looking for specialist help, because a happy, healthy dog will be eating their meals. All right. And if they're not, and we're having behavior issues that we're struggling with, that's definitely something that we need to be checking out. Now, sometimes it can be about treats. So people will tell me, oh, no, they don't like treats. They just won't take treats. So one of the things that I want to know is, so what are you using? So sometimes people buy packet treats from the supermarket, and, sometimes they can be all right, but, out and about, they often don't cut it. And one question I always want to know is, do they enjoy them indoors? Because if they don't enjoy them indoors, then maybe we need to investigate, something a bit further. But if they enjoy them indoors, but then they don't enjoy them when you go out and about, this is important information. Okay. Why, give me some examples of when they don't enjoy them. And again, sometimes simple changes help. As I say, those dry treats being offered might be okay at home, but they just don't cut it outside. But if we are looking at a situation when the dog refuses, if we're looking at the situations that the dog refuses treats, that gives us some important information, because being overwhelmed is an important factor in why dogs refuse food. Simply put, it's because when we're in fight or flight, our systems shut down unnecessary functions like the production of saliva, because you don't need to eat if you're preparing to run fast or, put up your fists and get into a fight. At that point, your body is just preparing for the movement and getting away from whatever it is that's causing the threat. So this is really helpful from a training perspective, because one of the things I want to know about a dog is, what are their triggers? What are things that really make them either very overexcited or make them very anxious as well? All right. So during my upcoming 5-day collie problem solving challenge, we're going to be looking at this in a bit more depth, because we're going to be focusing on why location is so important to consider as part of our training plans. Because if we are constantly going into what the dog considers an overwhelming situation, we need to back up a little bit, and we need to work out, how can I make this a bit smaller to be able to make this a bit more manageable to be able to help them with the training that I want to do. I'll share how you can get signed up for this, by the way, in my free Facebook group, which is linked in the show information. But any questions, just drop me a message. And so we talked, as I say, quite a lot about diet, and diet is definitely very important, keeping our collies happy. But the right exercise is also crucial too. That's definitely a piece of the puzzle to be able to create a happy Border Collie. Now, too much can actually be as problematic as too little. All right. So we've probably all, sadly, I've heard far too many examples of where Border Collies are shut up in crates throughout a day, quite often in a flat, and that's awful, and should not happen. That is that end of the spectrum, and that's definitely too little. But as I say, sometimes we can also give them too much. And especially if the exercise is causing these big adrenaline spikes, which the dog is finding it difficult to come down from, then we need to be maybe rethinking how we go about their daily exercise. Now, to get the right balance, I suggest taking a notebook and doing some diary keeping. All right, because it's really difficult from day to day to know what's happening unless we're just making just some small notes about it, just to kind of keep track of things. Now, let's say you're currently going out 3 to 4 times a day. So I've worked with some one-to-one students recently who, are possibly going out anywhere between 3 and 5 times a day. Now, what I've asked them to do, and we've talked through, is what is their dog's behavior like on each of those walks? All right. So first question is, how easy were they to manage? All right. Did you have to put a head collar on them? Because if you didn't have the head collar on, they would just drag you all the way down the street. That tells me that dog is massively over aroused. So, even if the dog is walking nicely, if they're walking nicely because of some training aid, I do want to note that down as well. Were you able to let them off the lead? Or did they have to stay on because you couldn't trust their recall? Were there things in the environment where you were like, nope, you're staying on the lead today because, that was the safest thing? How many times did they get overexcited or worried whilst you're out walking? There's a particular street close to us that has a vast amount of cats on it. And I know that sort of in the early evening when the cats are, their people are coming home, they're often out and about on the street. So that's a good place where a Border Collie might get overexcited because there's a cat around. But indeed, it might be that they're worried about something. It could be children coming home from school, something like that, where it's particularly busy. That might bother them. And then again, perhaps they started overexcited. All right. So it wasn't anything that happened while they were out and about. They left your house just completely over the top. And therefore they remained so whilst they were out walking. So for a dog that is regularly going over the threshold during their walk, I give the advice to experiment with reducing down the number of walks. And one of the things to look at is, do they cope with it okay? Or, are they pacing to get out and about and you're struggling with their behavior if you don't take them out? Interestingly, that for the dogs that we've experimented with so far, what we tend to see is that they can actually cope, and you give them something else to do and they're okay with that. So actually those the number of walks that you're going out on actually isn't as important as the quality of the walks that you do. And I really do believe this. So quality over quantity is important here. And to give you an idea, this is the sort of thing that my dogs get. So they'll get a walk which is anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour and a half each day. So that's some off-lead running. There might be a little bit of on-lead, but mostly off-lead running. And it's what I call dog time. So, it's rather than rehearsing obsessions like, chasing things or, running after a tennis ball repetitively. We're going somewhere where they can be dogs. They can go and do some sniffing. They can go and do some mooching around. Absolutely, they're going to do some running because they enjoy running as well. That's one of the things that they like. But we incorporate a lot of woodland walks into our walks. And the proprioceptive benefits of walking over different surfaces is really, really valuable to them. And again, it gives them lots of different opportunities for sniffing and just being dogs. And of course, I think as human beings, we also know the mental health benefits to being able to go and walk in woodlands and be out of the way of everyday life. So thinking about where I take them, and also variation. So not going to the same place every single day. One of the things that I think can start to happen with Border Collies is that they're extremely good at dot-to-dot puzzles. If you've followed me for any length of time, you'll know that I talk about this a lot. But they're really good at dot-to-dot puzzles. So if there is a point in the walk where you're like, okay, the lead goes on here, you can sometimes start to get dogs going, yeah, no, I haven't had a long enough walk. Thank you. Becomes very difficult to get them back on the lead. So going somewhere different can help avoid that, because you're providing that variety. It gives them different things. So sometimes I will go to a busy place and we'll do more work on moving around people and children and whatever else might be in the environment. And then other days we'll go somewhere where we won't meet a soul. So varying it, I think, is really important, because it gives both you and them a break. And if you're having a difficult day, I say this to all of my students, if you're having a difficult day, there is no shame in going, do you know what? I just want to avoid everybody today. I don't want to bump into dogs. I don't want to bump into other people. And yeah, just take yourself off for a nice quiet walk. I think that's a really sensible idea. So when working on a training or behaviour adjustment plan, we have to consider diet and exercise needs. Because if I only think about the training and behaviour that I'm trying to change, I do the dog a disservice, because the diet and the exercise needs underpin everything. And the truth of it is that our plans might well fail if we don't, because not because whatever we were doing wasn't a good plan, but because it wasn't underpinned by these solid, good health foundations. All right. Now, truth of it is, it does often take some trial and error, because what we need to do is we need to say we're changing some food. We might look at changing it for 2 weeks, and we're record keeping throughout, and we're like, oh yeah, that has changed things. And then we might say, okay, we're going to add in this supplement, and then, oh, okay, we'll do some more record keeping and changing. But good record keeping is definitely the way forward. And it does mean that positive, lasting changes are possible. Many of my students will tell you that. So just make sure that those two things are really solid when you're starting a training plan, because that will make a huge difference to the chances of success. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode gave you that extra boost to make a difference to your collie's behaviour. Today's episode was sponsored by my brand new 5-day Collie Problem Solving Training Challenge. The 5-day challenge is taking place from Monday, the 27th of January, 2025. And during this week, we'll be diving into common collie problems and coming up with training solutions that work for this unique and special breed. Don't forget, you can find information about this and all the resources mentioned in the Facebook group. So head over there now. Next episode, we'll be talking about how to make sure our collie's need for rest and relaxation is met. So stay tuned. So until next time, stay focused on progress, not perfection. And remember, every small win counts.